The following stories come from the Fortean times it happened to me. The Boy in the Toy Store. About 10 years ago, I worked as a cashier in a toy store, the tiny cramped kind you find in shopping malls. As you might imagine, these stores get torn apart by eager young children every day, and a big part of the closing procedure is straightening the shelves up for the next day. At this store, we had 4 aisles. The second aisle contained the boy toys, action figures, cars, guns, and so on, and had always been my favorite, where I always enjoyed looking at all the toys while I cleaned. On this particular night, I had just finished the boy aisle and had gone around to work on the girl aisle next to it. I had gotten all the way back to the front of the aisle when I looked up. We had mirrors on the ceiling, which allowed us to look from one aisle to the next, and thus keep an eye on potential shoplifters. What I saw in the mirrors was a little kid, no more than 4 or 5 years old, holding an action figure in his hand. He was crouched down, almost squatting. Having a kid in the store after closing was a big deal, since we'd have to call the police and report an abandoned or lost child. I was no more than 3 feet away from him. All I had to do was step around the aisle that separated us, which would take a moment. So I stepped around the end of the aisle, started to say something, and stopped. The kid was gone. Just gone. There was no place for him to hide, and no time for him to have run back down the aisle. He had just vanished. The action figure was still on the floor, the only out-of-place toy on the aisle I had cleaned not 10 minutes before. I told my manager, who said he'd had a similar experience, only that on occasion, the little boy had ducked under a table with a big white tablecloth over it. 2 seconds later, the manager had lifted the cloth to find no one there. It must be hell to haunt a toy store and not be able to open all the packages. Ghostly Brothers. The following happened when I was in my early 20s and down for the weekend from university, visiting my older sister. As there were no guest rooms in her Victorian terraced house, I crashed the night on the lounge floor, comfortable on big cushions pulled off the sofa. Comfortable, yes, but restless. There was a bright streetlight just outside the window, and it shone through the thin curtains. I couldn't sleep. About 1 o'clock, I was thinking of getting up and finding a book to read. I rolled onto my back and saw 2 boys standing at my right side, looking down at me. They were wearing Edwardian-style sailor suits and had blonde pageboy haircuts. One looked about 8 years old, the other about 10. I knew they were brothers straight away. I sensed no malevolence, just curiosity. Nonetheless, it scared the bejesus out of me. At that time in my life, ghosts didn't fit my worldview. I closed my eyes in denial. I lay for a while, too petrified to move to the light switch or to open my eyes in case they were still there. I tried to believe it was just a dream, but one knows, once a dream ends, when it was a dream. Then I was convinced they were real. When I had shut my eyes, I had seen a negative image fading on my retinas. An image in a dream would just vanish, but a real object reflects light. When I eventually dared to look again, they were gone. But I had no more sleep that night. With some embarrassment, I told my sister about the vision. She believed me. Later, I discovered from old newspapers in the local library that 2 boys had died of consumption in that house in Edwardian times. Their mother had died in hospital shortly before that, and I guess the boys had not heard the news before they died. I think they were still waiting for her to come home. I didn't stay again for some time. When I did, my sister told me she had sometimes been saying to the house, "Your mother has gone, you must follow." It seemed to do the trick, as I never felt uneasy there again. Okinawa Poltergeist. In 1968, I was 20 years old and serving at an isolated U.S. Coast Guard Loren station on the island of Okinawa. Loren is a worldwide navigation system that I believe has since been replaced by GPS. I was on late-night watch in the Loren timer room, keeping watch over 10 or 12 Lauren timers. These were machines approximately the size of a large refrigerator, with scopes and dials on the front. They were for synchronizing received and resent electronic pulses. The room had a row of timers down the center, partially dividing it in half with an electronic repair shop on the other side. There was some visibility into the repair shop area, as the machines were spaced out about 18 inches apart. Several hours into the 8-hour watch, I heard a crash, and on walking into the repair area, found that the metal lid from a trash can placed under a coffee serving area had flown off and landed approximately 20 feet away. I replaced the lid and phoned the duty maintenance petty officer, who was the only other person on watch and awake at the time. There were only 18 to 20 people on the station. He immediately answered the phone in another building several hundred yards away, so I ruled him out as a practical joker. I returned to my desk, and as I was pondering this, it happened again. I walked over, replaced the lid, and again returned to my desk, around the corner and just out of sight of the trash can. I then heard a third loud crash. I walked around the corner of the row of timers and again saw the lid 20 to 25 feet away from where I had just securely placed it on the trash can. I then heard a metallic jangling noise. The metal stirring spoons in a water glass next to the coffee pot were standing on end and rattling around inside the glass. As I grabbed the spoons to stop them, a glass salt shaker next to the coffee urn tipped over, without my touching it. The lid unscrewed as I watched, and the salt ran out over the tabletop. Shaken, I ran back towards my desk. As I approached the desk, a plastic paper tray next to the phone rose from the desktop and flew toward me about 15 feet, then accelerated at an angle to the floor, as if thrown, scattering sheets of paper everywhere. I again called the maintenance officer on the other side of the station. By the time he arrived, the activity had stopped and never happened again, either to me or anyone else that I'm aware of, while I was there. I remember these events vividly. Nothing like this had ever happened to me before or since. A really odd connection is that, while I was in the tiny fishing village near the station a few days later, I found out that this had occurred during the local Oben festival, also called the Festival of the Dead. During this festival, the dead are believed to revisit the earth, and their souls are guided and comforted at night by the light of paper lanterns displayed near the above-ground stone crypts, as the bones of the ancestors are removed, ceremoniously washed, and then returned to the crypts. The people at number 64. This is a true story, and, as I recall it now, the whole thing seems so incredible that it's hard to believe it actually happened. It took place at a well-to-do inner-city Glasgow address in 1973. I had just secured a position at the BBC and was delighted to find a place only a few streets away from the studios. The flat was located in the middle of a pleasant tenement row. The ground floor tenants were a young couple in their late 20s who introduced themselves when I moved in, although I have no recollection of their names. He was a little overweight and wore tatty clothes, and I remember thinking his hair needed washing. She was thin with a grin that appeared somewhat unnatural. I don't remember asking them what they worked at, but I do remember clearly hearing "Thus Spake Zarathustra," the theme from the film 2001, blaring from their stereo. They did point out to me that I wasn't to disturb them if I heard that music, as if it was playing, they'd be making love. The owner was an attractive woman in her 30s. She lived at the back, also on the ground floor. She said she was married, but I never saw her husband. She was proud of the renovation they had done to the place, and, on my first day there, she led me to the top floor to show off the work they had done to restore it to its former glory. The whole floor was an open space with nothing but a ladder standing on sheets of white canvas covering the wooden floorboards. "We're doing the ceiling," she said. Half of it was painted cream, the rest was a deep pink. My accommodation consisted of a large room on the middle floor. It contained a bed, a small couch, and basic cooking facilities in one corner. A bathroom occupied the rest of the floor. I was very restless that first night and couldn't get warm. The air seemed to chill my bones despite having a 2-bar heater next to me all night. The next couple of nights were the same. In fact, I remember waiting in the BBC crew room to go on a job when a sound recordist commented on my appearance. "Clubbing?" he asked, noticing the bags under my eyes. "I can't sleep." "Aunt Beebe getting to you?" he quipped. Aunt Beebe is an affectionate term for the BBC. Apart from the chill in the room, every time I came and went, "Thus spake Zarathustra" was blaring from the stereo in the ground floor flat. One way to keep warm, I thought to myself. The sleepless nights continued, and the chill seemed to intensify. I was becoming extremely uncomfortable in the place. I had another chat with the sound recordist because I knew he was interested in psychic stuff. "It needs exercising," he recommended after hearing more about it. "There's a trapped spirit in your room. That's why it's so cold." That did it. I decided to leave. I approached the owner, whom I had not seen since moving in, to inform her of my decision. She didn't seem too upset that I was leaving after only a week. The last night was particularly cold. I had temporary accommodation arranged, but it wasn't available until after 9 o'clock the following morning. I was packed and ready to leave at 6. I sat inches from the heater and stared at the second hand as it crawled around the face of my watch. I had a shower to try and shake off the chill that seemed to cling to my body and eat at my bones. On the way from the bathroom back to my room, I was somewhat shocked to see someone walking down the stairs from the empty space on the top floor. I looked at this person, and a cold shiver ran down my spine. I couldn't decide if it was male or female. It wore black trousers and a knee-length coat. The hair was cut short, and I remember the eyes staring at me. They were blank, as though there was no functioning brain behind them. I found it hard to breathe as I gasped in fear. I felt a chill run up and down my spine. "You leaving?" I clearly remember it asking. The voice seemed to come from somewhere other than the lips. I just nodded my acknowledgement. "No one ever stays long in that room," it added before turning and walking back up the stairs to the empty space above. I dressed in seconds flat, grabbed my suitcase, and was already packed, and raced down the stairs and out into the blackness of the pre-dawn. It felt so warm being out there in the cold early morning air. I heard, "Thus spake Zarathustra," as I hurried past the ground floor flat. I went back a week later to see if there was any mail for me. I still looked forward to letters from my folks in New Zealand. I banged the gold knocker on the black front door, but no reply. Shortly after that, I moved to London to continue my work with the BBC. Almost 2 years later, I had a filming trip to Glasgow. I took the opportunity to visit number 64. I was curious to see if they were still there. The black paint had peeled on the front door. The grass had grown over the garden strips either side of the front path. It was obvious no one was living there. I decided to ask the neighbors on either side if they knew anything, but they were not home. To this day, I have no idea what happened, but I do believe the owner, the loving couple, and the strange androgynous person on the stairs were not of this world. I truly believe that for 1 week, I shared a house with 4 ghosts. I'm convinced that's what they were. Why, on the last visit, the place was empty and apparently abandoned is still a mystery to me. The Singing Woman, the Man in Gray, and the Hand. In 1979, we moved to a brand new house in Wolverhampton. It was built on the site of an older Victorian terrace house known locally as the Wiki House. According to an old chimney sweep, back in the late 1970s, the Wiki House was a colloquial term for a house like this that had had quite a few fires, although as far as he knew, no one had ever died in any of these particular incidents. As soon as we moved in, I knew I didn't feel very comfortable there. The house seemed somehow unfriendly. After a few months, we were awoken by someone singing on the landing in a high-pitched voice. There were no discernible words, just a rising and falling in pitch. The voice was loud enough to wake my dad, who, oddly enough, was peering into the plug hole of the sink when I opened my bedroom door. He seemed to think it was wind coming through the waste pipe. I didn't like to point out that the plug was firmly in place in the hole. We exchanged bemused looks and went back to bed. However, we were woken every night for about 3 weeks by the singing, and the entire family had landing meetings directly after to discuss it. The singing stopped after a while, but new odd goings-on started, such as bed shaking, net curtain twitching, and door slamming. The shows, as we termed them, have continued for 20-odd years. I left when I was 17, but my mom still lives in the house, and have been witnessed by various friends on sleepovers. Incidents have included dancing or moving furniture, doors refusing to open, furniture moving, voices heard conversing in empty rooms, loud bangs, and independent reports of a man in a gray suit looking out of the windows, seen by both children and adults, though never by me. Mum seems to think the incidents are not unfriendly and will beseech the spirit, as she calls it, to please let me open the door when she finds herself unable to move from room to room. She actually saw it stroke my son's head once. He was asleep in the living room at the time. Later, he confirmed to her that the man in the gray clothes was watching the TV with him. My son, who's now 15, described them as 1970s style clothes, with flared trousers, a waistcoat, and a big wide tie, which is strange, as we moved in the new house in 1971 and were the first occupants. On one visit, my wife was in bed when she saw a disembodied hand appear. She said it was a pale male hand, and I didn't want to open my eyes further to see what it was attached to, as the position of the hand would have meant the owner of it would have to be floating above the mattress. Perhaps it was connected to the man in gray, whom Mum saw stroke my son's head. I've only ever been aware of the female component of the incidents, the singing, for example, which have always made me acutely afraid of the place. I have a feeling the main protagonist, despite the male presence seen by nearly everyone who has ever stayed in the house, is female. As an update, this weekend I saw the pool balls on a pool table roll and click madly together for about 15 minutes, while my mom listened downstairs. The pool table is in the spare bedroom, my old room. As a side note, while chatting with the next door neighbors, they reported that when the house is empty, when my mom is on holiday, for example, they regularly hear doors slam and the sound of footsteps on the stairs in the house, coming through the thin terrace walls. Thank you for watching this video. I hope you liked it. If you want more videos like this, make sure to leave a like, comment, and subscribe. You can even add your own spooky stories in the comments or on my Reddit page r/IHaveASpookyStory. Maybe your story will end up in the next video. Good night, sleep tight, and don't let the shadows bite.